Tsarion. He was born in Northern Ireland. He's an expert on the occult mysteries of Ireland and America. He's the author of the acclaimed books Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, Astrotheology and Sidereal Mythology, The Irish Origins of Civilization, The Trees of Life, Exposing the Art of the Holy Deception, and The Disciples of the Mysterium. Michael gives all kinds of presentations on the Western magical tradition, the Hermetic arts of divination, Atlantis and the prehistoric ages, ancient Ireland and the Druids, astrotheology, the origins of evil, secret societies, the female Illuminati, war on consciousness, subversive use of sacred symbolism, symbolic literacy, and psychic vampirism. And I would even say that's a small list as well. Michael's been researching this for a number of years and has a wide body of knowledge and information to share. So Michael, thank you so much for being a part of the Modern Knowledge Tour. We're here in Halifax and we're honored to have you.
Thank you, David. It's appreciated. It's great to be part of this great event that you guys have put on. Thanks for that introduction as well.
It's my pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to getting into today's discussion. The topic we wanted to discuss with you today, Michael, is the female Illuminati. And some people here have obviously are very familiar with, you know, the Illuminati, and we've even had a couple speakers touch on it. I wondered if you could just first give a good synopsis of, you know, the Illuminati in general, and sort of give people a little bit of background. We have some new people here, and then we can get directly into your thesis about the female Illuminati.
Yeah, well, it's a very intriguing line of research that happened a couple of years ago. We're still putting the final touches to the actual program, and we're hoping to make it as comprehensive as possible because it is a deep subject. So the first thing is that when you're studying these subjects of secret societies, it's not frivolous. It never was for me. But the reason why one would want to go off on continuing studies is because you know, it's like deep sea diving. You start off with sort of snorkeling, and then, you know, you get more engrossed in it, and then you find out that, hey, you know, there's these submerged wrecks or these strange creatures down in the murky depths. And so you keep on going because it's just exciting to go down deeper and deeper into the ocean to discover these mysterious things that maybe haven't seen the light of day and that have been heavily concealed. Then comes the equipment that is needed, you know, because now you're dealing with dangerous waters. It can be life-threatening. The weather can change in an instant. Your senses need to be sharpened. It's like training yourself to see things in the dark. So the Illuminati name actually gives it away, gives you a clue. Illuminati, what's light got to do with it? So anyone who's read, you know, my Irish Origins book, which goes in deeply to the real agendas of the secret societies, first of all, I've always been interested in what's up at the top of the power pyramid. Students of this subject know it's a pyramidical structure. We're dealing with a hierarchical setup. But as to what lies at the top, who really hides at the top of the pyramid. I mean, you get asked that question anyway by people. Hey, you know, Michael, who are the names? And I've always researched and studied the names of the people who are, you know, like the Geo Griffins and other great minds who actually bring those names to bear. So you get asked those questions. And so as you start to study more and discover who these people are, you realize that they are, in fact, experts at manipulating a certain kind of light. Light has a hell of a lot to do with it. So one goes forward and sees how light is used in advertising, how light is used in religion, how light is used just in even in daily life, and then some of the more metaphysical principles of light. And the deeper you go, you start to understand something about the uses of light and why light actually turns up as a symbol and a metaphor in Masonry and in these groups that are connected to the greater Illuminati matrix, okay? Because Masonry, Rosicrucianism, Templarism, you know, we're talking about a lot of different cabals here, some very peculiar, others a little bit more on the street level, so to speak, you know, and others that are just, as I say, more hidden. So it's like plumbing the murky depths of the ocean. You have to be, you know, careful, but I'm a person who believes that a lot has already been said, you know, by researchers such as myself, and we've covered a lot of the bases. So of the last year or so, I wanted to plumb, you know, deeper depths and get into some highways and byways that may not be for everyone. to ask some deeper questions about the human race and about who we are, and also about these hidden forces, the hidden elite, to bring out aspects of their ideology and their belief systems and the symbolism and the wordplay. I'd say, you know, symbolism comes into this hugely. I've done a lot of work on that, as you well know. Etymology, the connotative and denotative uses of terms and words is very interesting to me. It's kind of a trail. You can follow that trail. And I've got a lot of information on it. So it was a question as to whether or not we treated it, you know, reverently, or whether we did it the more topical way. But then I thought, you know, I've done topical things. I've done things like Architects of Control, and hey, we're doing this recent Path of the Fool series, you know, which is very interesting. But when it came to the female Illuminati thing, you know, I realized that we're dealing with the absolute, you know, rock bottom depths of secret societies and where they came from and what they believe. So this thing has to be done in a little bit more of an academic way, and bringing references to bear, and a lot of research, a lot of reading, and then try to compress all of that into, you know, what, 2-3 hours perhaps. So, you know, the process is ongoing, but it's a fantastic study, and I think people will be delighted with the end results.
Oh, that's fantastic. So maybe share with us some of the conclusions that you first went into when trying to analyze this, because I agree there's so many different areas we could get into, but what was it that first led you down this particular path and introducing the female element of it? What would that mean to people, the female Illuminati?
Well, yeah, people who are familiar with a lot of my work going way back to the beginning do know that I'm very interested with the whole concept, not just of injustice, but where evil itself came from. And so my very first book on Atlantis tried to go into one angle of that. Subsequent works have also done that. I've often said that my interest in ancient times, be it Atlantis or, you know, ancient mythologies, ancient Ireland, you name it, is really based on what is going on today. It's not that I'm, you know, a professional historian whose whole focus is on history. My focus is on the kind of events that are going on in today's modern world, and what the etiology of that is, what the history of those, the weird phenomena that we experience today. And that's basically continued on. But when you know, that's what the female Illuminati is also part of. It's an ongoing part of my research. It doesn't stand alone. It's connected to the past work I've done. But when you ask questions about, when you start asking questions about evil, the origins of evil, the nature of evil, whether you like it or not, these are psychological and philosophical questions. And you're asking about the nature of men and women. And in past work, I always spoke about the fact that we were traumatized by an age of catastrophe, which damaged the psyche, and is basically, at this point, a kind of ego functioning came into existence, more familiar to us, the one that we kind of know today. And this is the kind of ego functioning that has some aberrant aspects to it. And then you're asking questions then about also, all right, but didn't that trauma, I mean, that trauma had these psychological after effects, and it changed us as beings. A certain amount of genetic interference also changed us biologically. So we're talking about biological and psychological traumatization, which made us into the kind of bipolar beings that we are today. You know, and of course I've fleshed this out more in the books for people who are new to this. But as this kind of questioning goes on, you start to realize that there's also questions of gender, right? Because we're split also at masculine and feminine, male and female. And there's an awful lot of conflict, awful lot of injustice, awful lot of crime involved in that dynamic. And traditionally, it's been thought of as that the male of the species, right, the masculine sex is the most violent, and there can be no question that openly, exoterically, in the theater of the world and in daily life, that certainly seems to be the case. And also when you look down through history, that appears to be the case. But if you really start getting into this thing philosophically, and believe me, this is not to exonerate anything to do with male violence by any means, but obviously it takes two hands to clap. And so I've been working with that question of the genders and the kind of interactivity between them, and the kind of sleight of hand that may go on, and some of the more subtle connections that exist between men and women, you know, that are beneath the surface. and how this whole thing works. And that just comes under the realm of sort of just general psychology. I wouldn't be the first person who's looked at this. This is a well-known subject, you know, the conflicts between male and female. I mean, this has been going on now since the, you know, Freud and before Freud, so there's nothing new there. But what happened was, the real gear shift is that the more that you start looking back into the ancient myths and legends, and that's my forte, that's what the whole Atlantis book was about, was looking at the evidence for alien visitation in the legends of Ireland, which had never been done before, right? Zachariah Sitchin had done stuff with the Babylonian, Sumerian, and I picked up from there and said, hey, why has nobody done the same thing looking at the Irish record? Because it's actually one of the richest records you could have to look into for all sorts of strange phenomena, you know, of off-world beings and genetic manipulation. That was the first book that I did. So again, there's nothing really changed. And then when I start looking at this question in ancient mythologies, you start to find out that women, especially women of great power, I mean queens, what today would be called, you know, sorceresses and witches and what have you, even certain goddesses. You know, there's a lot of interesting goddesses like Kali, for instance, and many others I could mention. There's a whole story there. There's a story there about matriarchy, right? There's a story there about matriarchal sects, matriarchal cults, because as a matter of fact, sociologists and anthropologists are very hesitant to believe that there was a thing known as the matriarchal communities, matriarchal societies. I actually think there probably were, but you're never going to prize that out of the masculine, patriarchal, you know, academics who just simply can't bring themselves to accept that. At least in the West, they can't, right? But, okay, let's say for a moment, all right, maybe there wasn't matriarchal societies, but there definitely were matriarchal sects and matriarchal cults, going back so far back you can't even believe. I mean, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago. And there's lots of evidence for this. Then you shift gear again and you start saying, okay, well, these matriarchal cults had tremendous power. They may have even dominated certain epochs of the ancient world. And then being a student of secret societies like Masonry, having a good background in art history, and in, as I said, the legends and myths of the world, then I started to notice that a great deal of the secret society symbolism that we see actually comes out of some of these matriarchal cults. And it would be too long-winded to, you know, to go into that right now, but just in general, I would say it was interesting to me to notice that a great deal of the symbolism, things like the pentagram and the obelisk, and even the sun, we went into this in the recent Path of the Fool series, that it's not just the moon that's considered, it's not just the moon that should be considered a symbol of the female, but the sun as well. In fact, the astrological symbol for the sun, which is a circle with a dot in it, is a symbol of the female breast, actually. So even the very symbol of the sun is female. And we've elaborated on this in other works. So it's just, to answer your question, David, it's just that I wanted to take that even further. To start looking, again, most of my work, whether it's Atlantis work or the Irish origins work, this was the jump start. I'm not the expert on it, you know what I mean? As a lot of people try to say that I am. I'm just jump starting, giving a proverbial jump start to a subject that I think in the modern 21st century, 20th and 21st century, they need to be restarted again. Perennially through the last, you know, 100, 200 years, they've come and then they've gone. They've come and they've gone. We've had experts who've looked into this, researchers, thinkers, and then those subjects have kind of lapsed. And we know the reason why they've lapsed is because they're threatening to the academics, right? So again, that's the same thing. The female Illuminati is my project, but it's just, again, to jumpstart a new perspective, a new look, a deeper look, this time including the women of the world, because it's axiomatic, isn't it, that Godfrey de Bouillon had a mother, and he had a wife, as all the tyrants mostly do. I mean, Pol Pot, right? Adolf Hitler, you know, Genghis Khan. These people had mothers. Now, how did then the mothers allow them to grow up tyrannical? How did their wives condone their violence? This goes for many of the figures you haven't even heard of, or at least the world wouldn't have even heard of. The Caesars, these Merovingian kings, the kings of England. You know, the history studded with these tyrants like Edward Longshanks, you know, or let's say Richard I, you know. So there's no shortage of male tyrants, you know. But you see, there was very, very important women, you know, close to these men. So I just want you know, as I said, as your eyes acclimatize to the dark, you start to bring into center stage, into the limelight, some of the people, you know, that we wouldn't first normally think, you know, because these Queen Christinas, you know, and Eleanors of Aquitaine, and these other even semi-mythological characters that you find and say studded throughout the Arthurian legends and many of these other great folk tales and legends of the ancient world. And then the goddesses of the ancient world, you know, it's endless when you plunge into it. So this is where I wanted to go, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think it is fascinating. It's not all evil and horrible. There's a lot of very positive aspects to all of this, looking into these ancient cults and these matriarchies. The female form fills art. Right? It's the most painted form is the female in all forms of art, be it, you know, modern or ancient. So there's a story there, a story that's never been told. And again, it was symbolism and etymology and that kind of subject matter that sort of led me down this way. Because, I'll end off with just one more anecdote. And that is that the famous pyramid on the dollar bill, the famous pyramid in general, which has caused so much controversy within this movement. Everyone has, you know, a spin on what it means. You not only find it on the dollar bill, of course, you find it on a lot of corporate logos, and it's being used extensively. Semiramis, Aphrodite, Venus, goddesses like that were actually worshipped as a pyramid. All right, in ancient days, Venus was actually known as the White Pyramid. She was worshipped. Her altar had a white pyramid on it. You know, the Ark of the Covenant shows those two angels. You know, America is symbolized by what? The Statue of Liberty. Guess what sex that is? What's the Oval Office all about? Ovals? That's female, you know? So it goes on. It's right there in front of us. Anyone who knows deeply about the occult history of America knows how important the star Sirius, the placement, the actual conjunctions and aspects about the star Sirius, but that was sacred to Isis in ancient Egypt. In fact, the entire Washington D.C. structures are based on the hieroglyphic for the star Sirius, but it wasn't the star they were under. It was under Isis, the goddess of the star. So you know, we got to push forward. A lot of people ended there. Well, yeah, Sirius is involved. Washington D.C. is based on Sirius, the star, yeah, Egyptian. Yes. There's lots of stars in the heavens, and Sirius is certainly important, but carry on. Well, what do you mean carry on? What is sacred about Sirius then? You see, but that connects to an entire goddess cult. That star is just the keyhole, that's just the tip of the iceberg, to an entire pantheon, an entire set of rites and rituals, a huge, important cult that spread all over the world. You think Isis was only worshipped in Egypt? She had her personifications in every corner of the globe. Even in the Scandinavia they had a version. It might have even been the version that Isis was based on, but without even going down that road, the very fact is they had a goddess called Is, I-S, the goddess of ice. That's where we get the word ice, I-C-E. Is, I-S, was a goddess in I think, Norway, that is the prototype of Isis. All right, but so this goddess was everywhere, and she was often worshipped as a pyramid. So again, as I pursued and pursued and pursued, and I'm like that, I don't just give up, you know, when I've written a book on something or say, well, I'm kind of bored with this now. All my life I've continued, penetrated. A lot of people just give up and they stop. My researches have gone on and on and on, and relentlessly, deeper and deeper and deeper. You know, and then the Female Illuminati project and the website, it's just the concept is now to sort of share my findings with the world, you know, and get their feedback, which I've been doing already, and it's an incredible study, incredible study. And again, emphasize, I may have started it, but this is collaborative. People are sending me stuff from all over the world, and I mean that, all over every single day. And I'm also getting other confirmations from people in other respects. In fact, yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, I had an email from a musician who's worked as a musician within the Hollywood system and has been to umpteen MTV awards and knows Hollywood inside out. And he confirmed for me in email, I get this every now and again, and he was mostly talking about my work on, you know, subversive symbolism, but in general other things as well. And he was saying, Michael, you're right. In everything you say about, you know, the Dionysian cult and the cult of Venus and all the symbolism and even some of the satanic stuff that's going on in Hollywood, I can absolutely confirm for you that that is the case. I've been secretly following your stuff. I love it. And you're right. So here's another insider. It's not the first one I've had. I've had many, but it's so wonderful again, just 24 hours ago. And you know, confirmation from within the system, from the horse's mouth, that this stuff is absolutely going on behind the scenes. Their intense love of symbolism, the weird subliminal, stuff that they encode so that we're changed on a more of a subconscious level. And so this gives me tremendous encouragement that no matter how deep you go into the obscure areas, as I say, like plumbing the depths of the deepest oceans, almost perilously, it's worth it. It's worth it because this is a very real subject. It's not frivolous. And, I hope that these new programs and projects that we're all involved in, and David, I know you're part of it as well, so, we'll be taking that to the public and welcome their feedback and their contributions on that down the line.
Yeah, and as you're talking, it kind of reminds me of that old saying, behind every great man, every great king, there's an even greater woman. And that's not to in any way demonize women in general. In fact, I see now that the true essence of what it is to have that feminine energy, even males possess this as well, and we're looking for the balance between the two. If you look at what's going on in Hollywood and with the symbolism, we see that they're actually trying to distort the true virtuous, more caring and loving, creative aspects of the feminine consciousness and the feminine energy. You look at these Miley Cyruses and all these different celebrities that go in as, they're like the cutesy little goody two-shoes, and then all of a sudden they're coming out and they're doing satanic rituals on stage for the masses. There's a pollution of, the true divine feminine, as you might call it, versus what is this new injection of, what we see in the media today. I wondered if you wanted to comment on that and on the symbolism surrounding that around us.
Well, I couldn't have you put it in a nutshell, actually, because remember, it's important to say that the work that I'm doing on the female Illuminati is not necessarily a comment on modern women. This is to do with that few, like you say, these special women who were around these leaders, and the people who, whether it was in secret societies or in monarchies or in the religions. Let's take a couple of examples. Your Constantines, right? Your Theodosiuses, your Justinians. Theodora, there was people, like Poppea, who was around the Caesars at the birth of Christianity, one of the most crucial figures, and probably even towering above her was this Theodora character, and there's many other one could mention. So one has to see pathology. It doesn't just affect the male consciousness, it can affect females as well. So although it's not a comment on modern women by any means, we're not looking at it at that myopic level. We're dealing with a more general look at the people who created the institutions that we know today. And it's important to look with cold calculating eyes about that, and to tease out some of these facts, because these women did give birth to these unbelievable tyrants. So just as you said, and I've often said in my work, that which has the power to take you up, to elevate the soul, has equal power to drag you down and destroy. So my goodness, the feminine energy, the motherly energy, can certainly do that. And that's why this needs to be looked into as well. I mean, even in the esoteric tradition, the name of God, Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He, has 2 parts feminine, 2 parts masculine. So this starts to intrigue one as they penetrate into this subject matter. So, but as you say, the nurturing qualities that we associate with good women, well, there's the opposite aspect of that as well, and I think it figures very largely in the pathology of the world's great tyrants, actually.
And another thing on that as well is that we have this, we've heard about Big Brother, you read George Orwell's 1984, and you have this idea of a big father figure, and of course in religion, and of course like, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they have masculine deities, and it's very much focused on that, but it's always left out the feminine element as well. And we go into, in the Eastern cultures, you have the yin-yang, you have the showing of the polarities, and we're trying to achieve some kind of a balance here, and it seems like everything ends up becoming distorted, and they're trying to get an imbalance going on and get everybody confused, that they're disconnected from sort of a holistic approach to things. I wondered if you could share a little bit of some more examples on some of the symbolism, this feminine symbolism that is permeating this, so that people can recognize it, and maybe explain as well that even with a symbol, and you mentioned it a little bit, Michael, this is something that can be used, as you said, to lift somebody up, to elevate, and it can be also used as a tool of manipulation. So if you could comment on that.
Yeah, one of the most intriguing ones, there are many, but again, it's good. In the program, we'll probably get the deal just with the cardinal, symbols, and then on the website, instead of packing the program too full and also making it too long, we're putting some of the miscellanea on the website, and then we'll deal with some of the symbols, the major ones, so that, these are the ones that can be spotted by a novice even. I found that this works really good in the programs that I did on subversive symbolism. You show the main ones, like the dove, the pyramid, the sun, the pentagram, the pyramid, this kind of thing. And there's a few others like the owl, and then even a novice who comes to these subjects, like when I did these subversive symbolisms, I got a lot of good feedback because those symbols are literally so common that people were seeing them after watching the program, back in, this is almost like 10 years ago now. People then start to see this, and when you're really right, I didn't see it before. And so we keep to that same formula with the female Illuminati. One of the most obvious ones is, I think, either we mentioned it on the radio show I did with you, or it was on the Empress, the last card, was the whole concept of an underground stream, which is a code word. You remember the Eye of Ra, the famous Egyptian eye, but it has this descending part. It has a straight part underneath it, and then the sort of descent. That's the tier. So in Egyptian symbolism, or just in occult symbolism in general, and this is what I said earlier about when you follow the symbolism, you find out interesting things. Even though that's the eye of the sun god, part of the eye is a tier that is feminine. And it represents the goddess. Who would ever have thought of that? So, because to the Egyptians, the river Nile, all rivers, the sea, that's why we still even call the word, Mara, Mir for the waters of the earth, Stella Maris, the oceans, is feminine. Water, the movement of waters is feminine. And so when you start seeing these civic fountains, and you see these civic ponds in and around corporate buildings, you're looking at an extremely ancient motif there. And some of these fountains are very beautiful, other ones are horrible, ugly things. But that actually represents an occult lineman. So when you in your briefcase are walking across the corporate, patio there, the plaza, and you're walking over the bridge, and by the way, you can get out James Bond movies in which they use this ad infinitum, this concept. When you're walking over the sliver of water, the stream of water, it's like you're moving from one hemisphere to another. The same thing as the pentagram. It's an apostrophe, a little marker to say, oh, you think this is a corporate design. When you're walking into the shop, like in Macy's, you go through the door, or you buy this product and it's got, like Nestle and these other products that have these logos on it, these symbols. Whether you realize it or not, you're participating now in some kind of ritual. You don't know anything about it, and we certainly haven't sent you the guidebook, but nevertheless, you are involved in that, right? Adidas, using the three-tiered pyramid and what have you. Then you see these great corporate fountains. They're not even connected to a corporate building. They're right there in Trafalgar Square or what have you, the whole city. And then you find out that the Roman word cetus, C-T-E-I-S, which represented the womb or the vagina of the female, is one of the words from which we get the word city. It actually has Druidic origins as well, meant seat of the Druids. But one of the Roman origin of the word city is meaning the womb. So all cities are designed, especially like Paris and others, is a whole symbol of the female. And then you have the city hall. Hall is phallus, right? The phallus. Right in the middle of the word phallus, you find hall. And then city is the cetus, the circular round. So what the hell is going on here? And then people go, oh, Micah, you're crazy. And then they just pull out from any Bible or any ancient, any encyclopedia, a picture of the Temple of Solomon, and that's exactly what you see. You see the phallus, the phallic penetrating hallway, aisle that goes into the Holy of Holies, the cetus, So this is all based on ancient goddess worship. Sermon on the Mount, the Mount of Olives. Moses going up on the hill to meet Jehovah. What's this hill motif we keep discovering? And the idea that churches and cathedrals and sacred places and many corporate buildings are threshold, thrice hold. Well, 3 is the number of the goddess, the triangle again. That's why she was worshipped as a pyramid, because her number was always number 3. But the idea of then, these womb-shaped, mandorla-shaped doorways of churches, the fact that the clergy were the robes of the female, the fact that the Merovingians used to keep their hair long, the long-haired kings they were called, well, that's directly a symbol to the goddess of the long hair. And it goes on and on and on. Like we said, Sirius, the importance not just of Sirius, but of another star in Virgo called Spica, which turns out to be extraordinarily important, and that's not the only one there either. There are many other constellations that represent this goddess on her journey. We've heard of Hercules and his 12 trials, and we've heard of Odysseus and his trials. We've heard of the Knights of the Round Table and their trials, and we've heard of the Finn McCool in Ireland, the trials of the Fenians, in order to matriculate. How many know about the 12 facets of the goddess? So the thing is knee deep in these symbols that are all around us. And so my program is just basically to try and bring that out. There are some symbols that are definitely masculine, there's no question about that. But there are other ones that are not, and they've been associated with the matriarchal cults and some of these goddess figures for a long, long, long time. And I believe that these dragon orders, these secret societies, I call them the cult of Venus, or the cult of Dionysus, is what I call them, originally in my work. And but they're a branch of the Illuminati, they're a branch of that Black Lodge, and time has come to expose them and their machinations, just like the male branch, as far as I'm concerned.
It's just so incredible, and Michael, ever since I started looking into this topically, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you on getting out the work on female Illuminati and this thesis. This is just, it blows my mind. I can't help but look back to religion and the amount of feminine symbolism that is contained within it. When you look at churches, when you look at even, I'm trying to remember the name of the Caesar or the emperor that was the wife that had the influence on the removal of the concept of reincarnation from the biblical histories and from theology. And so if I wondered if you could comment on the feminine symbolism contained within even modern day or ancient religion.
Well, the first one that jumps to mind, and has always fascinated me from the beginning, is this whole Garden of Gethsemane number, which is often described as being a private garden in an actual house. They think it was Joseph of Arimathea's house. But in other works, the Garden of Gethsemane is also sort of hill-like. But then you turn even to the Golgotha, Skull Hill. That's a hill, right? So the crucifixion. Nobody in this world, in the sound of my voice, has ever questioned, why do they use a symbol of a hill in the crucifixion? Why wasn't it on a flat territory? The Romans actually used to crucify people all down the sides of the Appian Way, which is a street, a road, a long road. So why wasn't it on that? Why wasn't it, you can think of numerous, so why on earth, the motif of it is just so burned into our psyche, that image, that we don't break it down as detectives. We don't actually see what is there. Many philosophers have said that the most obvious is the least seen. And you know something? They're 100% right. So what it takes is to go over the Moses story, go over the Jesus story. These are lovely, lovely stories. They have elements of truth. But let's not get into it fanatically or in partisan. Just let's go over the story as has been shown to us. Why is there a skull at the base of the cross in many medieval drawings? Why is it called Skull Hill? Why are there 3 crosses and not more? What's these 2 female figures doing at the base? Jesus comes down from the cross and is in the arms of his mother, a character called Mary. But there's another Mary. There's Mary Magdalene. And her, the word tower, the word Magdala means tower, and towers are often on hills. So what are these motifs? Like I said, the whole idea of Moses coming down from a mountain. Why does he meet God on a mountain? Why? It seems a bit odd to have to climb up a whole mountain just to talk to God. Where did that symbol come from? And when he's there, he talks to God through a burning bush. Then the grotto, the cave, the tomb of Jesus, right? The tomb of Lazarus. Everyone's wondering about Lazarus. 3 cheers. What about the tomb? Nobody pays any attention to that. So the female symbols are all around us, but they're hidden in plain view. And so it's taken a lifetime to change the settings to get, so to speak, acclimatized to the darkness, so to speak, you know, like cat's eyes, and that's where you find the treasures. So but you have to adjust your settings. So a lot of people in this movement haven't done that yet, and so things that are in plain view, they've adjusted their settings enough to know there's something going on. I mean, in the alternative community, you know, we've moved forward significantly. It's a very young subject. It's very hard to introduce new subjects to any human mind, and this is a very new one, so we've been doing pretty good. But there's still a lot further to go. Flags, you asked about more symbols, you know. Flags that contain stars. Let's even go with, you know, the Masonic compass and rule, the famous one. Seen from another point of view, that's a female symbol, because what do you draw with the compass? Is the Vesica Pisces, isn't it? In sacred geometry, you draw the two circles, and the Vesica Pisces is pretty much a standard symbol of the goddess, which you even see over churches, and you certainly see it on the windows of sacred buildings and what have you. I've even seen it in the floor plans of certain sacred buildings. And you can find some of the most wonderful churches, like the one I saw at Perth when I was doing my Australian tour. Now, that place is fascinating. It's on a hill. That's why we headed up to it, because there was a church on a hill, right? Let's go, get up in the morning and head up there. And it was unbelievable. The doorway to the main church was designed like the Tree of Life. And this thing must have cost about £1,000 to make. It was a beautiful door. I have photographs of it. And so we have a Tree of Life doorway. Ha ha ha. Then we, oh, and by the way, in the city of Perth, they have a separate monument. They have even right out in the street, a big silver Tree of Life. So they even have another one. But in this church, the surrounding grounds not only featured the golden section, and I'm not joking you, the architects have actually put a golden section, sacred geometry, in the plan of the outside the church, which you can walk around, you know, and the kids think it's just a little funny anomaly, you know, a design, when in fact the whole thing is based on sacred geometry. So there you have your garden. There you have this garden grove motif right outside this church that's sitting on the hill, and that's just the beginning of the symbolism that I saw there. So, and then again, of course, think about all the other churches that exist. Then you have to take that up to the level where, okay, but all these churches, like all sacred buildings, are also aligned in the city. They're aligned through ley lines. They're aligned based on vortexes. Well, that is a subject that actually also comes out of the goddess tradition, by the way. The Druids who measured the land, Gaia, that's the name of a goddess, is the earth. So it all goes back to the measurement of the earth. Demeter actually means the meter, measuring Dia, measuring Gia, measuring Gaia. So geometry, I've said this before in other works, that even almost all of our science and mathematics comes out of goddess worship. People are not familiar with this, but it's absolutely true. And there's multiple ways to explain that. But in short, all I can say is that the science, the very curiosity, let's say, that led the science first originated in studying the female and her ways. So, you know, as I say, once you get into this, it goes very deep. Numbers, you talked about God, the number 9, the number 7, you know, we're dealing with some heavy-duty goddess numbers that we find in society all around us, number 13. And that's because it takes 12 months for the moon, 12 months for the sun to transit the zodiac completely, right? But it takes 13 months for the moon to transit. So the number 13, that's also a number of Mother Mary because she was the 13th disciple. On and on and on, but then it becomes very important when you find out that there's 13 levels to the pyramid, right? There's the 14th one is actually detached, it's leaving 13, that's a goddess symbol, and you can't come to the end of the number 13 when it comes to the dollar bill. You cannot come to the end. There's so much 13 symbolism on the dollar bill and in American heraldry in general, corporate heraldry and government heraldry. Well, that number happens to be female, and that's not me saying that, that's classically known. It's accepted that 13 is indeed the female number, okay? So it's straight there up, let alone when you go even deeper and you find out even more.
That's funny, with 13 being feminine, when you think about the Jesus story, and you have the 12 disciples, and then Jesus, of course, being the 13th character, and then you have a lot of symbolism through art of the Jesus figure wearing gowns and long hair, again, the same symbolism. It's just interesting when you look at it in a different way, and that's really what we're trying to encourage people to do today. Michael, I have one more question for you, and then we're going to try to maybe open up to a couple questions from the audience, if anybody would like to ask some questions to Michael. But what I was thinking of is that we live in Canada, beautiful country, but here we are, of course, reigned over by the monarchs of England. and the banking fraternities in England, and of course the same power structure that runs the world. On our money, we have a picture of the Queen of England. And if you go back into the history of the Queen and the family bloodlines, maybe a lot of people don't know, but of course it's not the same story that you've been told in school and by the media. There is, of course, the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha bloodline, and even Michael, you've done a great deal of work on the coronation symbolism, the symbolism of the coronation of these female monarchs. I wondered if you had any comments on the Queen and how that relates to this country and some of the symbolisms behind that, and if that relates in any way to this female Illuminati concept.
Yes, it does, because she is, it wouldn't matter if it was a king or a queen. I think that the fact that it is a queen is in itself very interesting. And I did go into that in the Queen's coronation symbolism of, that was an appendices of the Irish Origins DVD set, but it's now been taken as a standalone presentation, which is good. But it wouldn't matter, even if it was a king, you see, these are all the bloodlines that come out of about 1,000 years BC. Ireland and Britain was colonized by Egyptian royalty. They were descendants of Akhenaten. And ever since that time, a lot of the rites and rituals have an Egyptian sort of connotation, even when it's not obvious. And some of those are preserved today. And in that program, I went deeply into the symbolism of the, showing the 4 lions that the chair of St. Edward sits on, and the fact that it has a pyramidical top, and it's identical to those in Masonry. People can go to my Irish Origins of Civilization website and see those pictures if they want on the appendices pages. And the very fact that that coronation is loaded, the rings that they wear, that she was given in blue and red, I mean, phenomenal symbolism there. The fact that she is again on a pyramidical tier, the chair is there, and all the other symbolism. But what I was going to say is that, you see, by being the Queen, she is the head of 2 very, very important orders. She's actually the head of a lot of orders, but the 2 steering committee, these are what are known as Alpha Lodges of Freemasonry, is the Order of St. Michael and St. George. And although that sounds lovely, sounds very Christian, St. Michael and St. George, behind it is a very ancient pagan characters. And she's also the head of what is known as the Knights of Garter, right? The Order of the Garter. And garters, who wears garters? We go, oh, the Knights. It was like a belt, yes, but there's a double meaning there. The Knight of the Garter, women wear garters. So there's, again, as I say, you find this female symbolism of unlikely of places. The very fact that the seat, the throne, is where kings and queens are coronated, is already, to anyone who studied these matters, immediately the goddess symbol, because the most popular epithet of goddesses of the ancient world was the word throne. She was known as the Great Throne. There's no greater epithet. There's no greater epithet for goddesses than the throne. And the word seat, right? Isis' headdress was as of a seat. She was the goddess of the seat, the goddess of the throne. So the very idea of that. And then, of course, if you have a throne, then you have to have a throne room. And if you have a throne room, then you have to have a palace or a great shrine, like the shrines in Egypt. Then you pull out from that, and then you got the city again. So it's all nestled goddess symbolism all around you once you start to be able to decode it. Now, Asia, Europa, America, as we said, America is symbolized by the Statue of Liberty, right? Is born in the sign of Cancer, which is a female sign of the zodiac, and so on. And even, like I said, Europa and other continents are also figured, styled as a goddess. Europa certainly was. But many of the other land masses were, just like ships have a prow, which is always a female symbol, most of the continents of our world were dedicated to various goddesses. And there was almost like a goddess for every occasion. And this absolutely goes for Rome as well. So when you start seeing what looks like a bunch of warlike, tyrannical, saber-rattling cultures, when you dig down into the roots of their belief systems, right, like the Roman and like the Grecian, and even, as we know, the British Empire, you start looking deeply, you do indeed, as up till now I've shown and throughout my work, all this masculine, atomistic, solar symbolism. But that had to have its own root. And when you start going down deeper and deeper into the solar cults, you get to the stellar cult. Who the hell, what are they? Where do they come from? And you start studying it more and you go into the great works, and you start to see this mother symbolism and this female symbolism. As I say, it's not all negatives, it's not so simple as that. But then you start to discover the existence of, darker strains of it, and you start seeing the symbolism of that being used today. Now that can't be accident. There's lots of symbols to use. So if you find these alpha lodges of Freemasonry, and all of these kings and queens of modern historical times using this symbolism so frequently and deliberately, then you've got to know that it's not just accident. It's not just because they were told to do it by mommy and daddy. They're doing it because they believe in it. They believe in these powers. The 13th number also refers to a certain a certain house of the zodiac, the 13th sign of the zodiac. We're into that now, and then you start seeing how this turns up in dating, wars, and all sorts of other events. The number 13. And so, as I say, just one thing leads to the other, but you have to have an open mind, and you have to be constantly renewing what you know, right? So you revisit what you know, but then you upgrade what you know, and you continue the process. This is vital. You don't give up just because you go, well, I studied some stuff in 9/11, yeah, Masons rule the world, okay, yeah, the Jesuits, I got a general idea, let's go back to watching the game. No, you've got to keep on pursuing, because this is endless and deep, and even one man in one lifetime couldn't even get basically down, past the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. As I said, we can jumpstart these, people like ourselves here can jumpstart these subject matter, but it takes other people to pick up the baton afterwards and continue the process of discovery. That's what I feel is essential, because if you just leave it to one man or one woman, well, that's hopeless. That's what's been done in the past. That's why we know so little, because it's very easy to wipe out the discoveries of one person. How many people listening to the sound of my voice have heard of a Ignatius Donnelly or a Commons Beaumont, or a Conor McDarry? No, none. Right. Ergo, there's my point.
Oh, and it's a great point, Michael, and that's really what the goal behind this tour is to get people involved in being a part of the knowledge process. And this is not about having somebody up here telling you what to think and trying to convince you what to believe. That's the mainstream media's job. Your job here is to just simply think, and to think for yourself, and to open up your mind and go on this journey of discovery. One of the presentations that I very much enjoy from Michael is his age manipulation series, which you can see a lot of it on his website and on YouTube. And he opens up that talking about the fact that this is a process of discovery, and this is a discovery internally, and this is a discovery externally. So, Michael, I very much want to thank you for that. And I want to open this up to any members of the audience, or any of the other speakers, or anybody that would be interested in posing a question to Michael. And if that's okay with you, Michael, we'll take a few questions. Let me just explain the situation quickly to people here. We are desperately trying to get a hold of a G.W. Griffin, and we're not seeing him online just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep trying. If something happens with that, we are going to schedule a private recording of Michael and G.W. Griffin, and we're going to be releasing that on our tour subscription page because we very much want to make this happen. We're not sure what's going on Mr. Griffin's end. We're going to get it resolved, and we're going to get this information to you, because I think it's very important. So for now, what we'll do is we'll entertain some questions from the audience. So if anybody would like to come up, you can come up and sit on Santa's lap here, or you can take a chair next to me, and we can ask Michael some questions.
Let's introduce yourself.
Hello, Michael. How are you today?
Okay, mate. How's it going?
Thank you. Thank you. I had a question. We talked about the divine goddess, sacred feminine. And in the Catholic religion, it's easy to see that they massacre the divine sacred energy, and by doing that, by living in a world that is ruled by the masculine, by the men, it throws the whole world off balance. And I was wondering if there's anything about the Merkaba, the shot and the chariot, which you could maybe share with us with the symbolism also.
Well, you see, you're quite right there. That brought up a point we should have talked about earlier, which was this whole imbalance. When you have not integrated this feminine principle, which definitely was one of the theological teachings of the early matriarchies, and we're going to be going into this in the program about this evolution, and how it got corrupted, and what broke down, because obviously the female cults and the female sects, it was their job to bring up the children correctly and to have them be very balanced. In fact, you couldn't matriculate. I mean, now I'm talking more about Irish civilizations, pre-Christian. There was no chance that a child would ever get close to becoming a druid or anyone, even a lawmaker, or certainly a king, without that kind of integration. And it's quite obvious because you can see this for yourself when you read the ancient legends of Ireland. And I assume it would be the same for a lot of other places. The kings of Sumeria, the kings of Babylon, the kings of a place called Amoria, the Amorites. These guys always had symbols of the goddess around them. A shovel. Doesn't sound like a goddess symbol, but it was, because the shovel. Do you know today when you see some of these politicians doing these inaugurations where they go and they start digging up a tree, or they plant a tree and you see them with a silver shovel number? All these guys in suits and going around digging in the earth. That's so old, that one. That is literally thousands of years old, and it's about the Asherah and this thing called the Asherah pole and the planting of seeds and this whole thing. We're connected to goddess worship, right? So ancient monarchs, Marduk, Sargon, you name it. The Assyrians had it, the Syrians had it, you know, it was all over the shop. And Ireland too. So you get an understanding that there is no way that not only did the teachers have to initiate the young men, but those young men had to go through very important sexual rituals as well. We kind of laugh today, you know, we laugh at the circumcision rites and all of these weird, preposterous rites. But do you know that the whole going into the underworld, which was so immeasurably sacred, you know, the whole idea of a group of Indians protecting, say, a Native American, but they had this in Ireland as well, where the neophyte goes into the underworld. What do you think that's all about? That facing the shadow is a feminine ritual, by the way, and meeting the fears and meeting, you know, yourself and having to deal with the shadow, as we would today phrase it. But these were serious rituals. Any ritual, for instance, that involved going to nature, having to find an animal totem. You know, some people were even named after a certain animal because on that day when you turned up, that was the animal phenomena or the natural phenomena that the tribal leaders saw. So you just come for the first time, they might call you that. They might call you, you know, they might call you red leaf, for instance, because that they saw a red leaf dropping from a tree that, you know, the hour that you turned up at their place. So this constant acknowledgement of nature, you know, or wild buffalo or something like that. I'm just giving you examples, but this constant observation of what was happening during the day. In other words, what I'm saying is the sensitivity to natural phenomena, that got lost as time went by and as the patriarchal groups started to exist. And then as man started to live in these cities, then nature gets blocked out and you're no longer watching what the sun and the moon is doing, what the stars are doing. The lights of the city block out the light, you know? And so slowly there was a change. And the change that didn't happen 5 minutes ago. We're talking about a change that its origins actually are many thousands of years ago. And so there was indeed, as your question implies, a loss of connection with the feminine. And I still believe that that needs to be brought back. In my Path of the Fool, people have been following the Path of the Fool program that we've been doing monthly. You will see a big emphasis on that. So you're absolutely right. But what I would go on to say is that because there's been a distortion, you've got to realize how can you fix a problem? How can a doctor treat a disease unless you know how bad the disease is? You could never find the cure. You could never create the cure unless you know exactly how bad, you know, the pathology is. So right now, I would say that the pathology is so bad that our whole concept of what it means to be a man and a woman is shit. I mean, it is just, it's gone for a Burton. You know, so we're dealing with bad, so the females go, oh, well, you see, we're better than you guys because we got the feminine. You know, no, because even the femininity, what femininity is now based on the aberration of what male is. And what male is, the aberration is based on an aberration of what feminine is. So we're really in the shit. So there has to be a complete deconstruction. That's why I'm a deconstructionalist. That's why I believe in apophatic learning, because there's no way until you break down, until you completely break down the paradigms and the models that we have in these matters. And that can't be done collectively, that has to be done individually. You know, you can't wait for your teachers to tell you, the priests or any of these people, because all of that is an aberrance. So what we have now is an extremely skewed version of femininity, and we need to watch the media to see them working on it. They're partly responsible for making it bad and continuing to make it bad. And we have an aberrant, skewed version of what masculinity is, absolutely. We've got grotesque, extremist, malignant versions of masculinity shown us by the media. And we've got malignant, grotesque versions of what femininity is, and the child grows up thinking those are normal. So unless the parent has done something to show them, no, they're definitely not normal, you know, and then try to come back to some sort of archetypal normality, you know, but that's quite a task, isn't it? You need to have a lot of psychological and philosophical insight. You've got to be close to nature and animals yourself to even have a hope of bringing that off, and a good deal of luck as well. And then you might start to impart it, as I know, because many people email me, you know, they are parents and they do it. They're trying this as hard as they can. But then what about the mom and dad? What about the grandmother, parent, you know, the uncles and aunts? They may not agree with you what you're doing. They may think, why are you letting the kid have a longer hair? Or why are you doing this and that? And they may not approve of what you're doing. So there's a lot of conflict. But ultimately, I can only deal with the individual spiritual component of this, and that is that each individual is going to have to deconstruct what they know about femininity and masculinity, and kind of almost start again, because our society now, this is a huge problem, a crucial problem. It's in the back of my mind actually as I'm doing this program, The Female Illuminati, but yeah, it definitely needs to be in the back of everyone's mind to deconstruct a lot, not deconstruct malignantly. There's a malignant deconstruction as well. And that's what's going on with this gender dysphoria that's been rampant since the 80s. I don't mean that. I don't mean being unnecessarily transgressive just because it's cool. That's another media-generated, lie. You have to do this reverently and ultimately very spiritually, to start looking into what do I really know? And if that takes you into reading Otto Rank and Karen Horney and Jung and Freud, so be it. Go ahead, because you've got to do it. You've got to get that psychological insight to find out what on earth is a man, what is a woman, and where are the aberrant, seeds. That's progressive, actually. It sounds negative, but it's actually the most progressive thing you can do is to deconstruct what we already think we know about these subjects.
Thank you very much, my friend. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have another question from the audience.
Hey Michael, I'm Justin Brown from Unified Club Radio, locally CKU 88.1 FM and on PSN Radio Network in Chicago. My question is, you segue perfectly because you're talking about the idea of this deconstructionism. I'm wondering if you see a connection between the secrecy of the divine feminine behind powers over the centuries and the contemporary idea of destroying the image of the female in modern culture with things like performances by Lady Gaga or who we talked about, Miley Cyrus just recently. There's a lot of almost demonic or satanic sort of rituals going on, dark forces, a lot of occult symbolism in there. And with these rising ideas of, let's just say, unification of fields and ideas, unified field theory, singularity approaching, new world order, these power sources trying to create a single focus, do you think it's an accident that possibly they're trying to deconstruct the idea of male and female altogether to come up with some sort of androgynous focal point for the future? When you think about the idea of the Greys or contactees, the 50s, blonde, long hair, blue-eyed, beautiful people in a sexless sort of extraterrestrial making contact, do you think that's an accident, or do you think that's purposely orchestrated?
Yeah, that last point is the key, actually, because somebody would say, well, why? Well, it's all about why they're doing it. And first of all, not a lot of people would even believe what I'm talking about is a deliberate activity. Let's get that clear. I believe it is deliberate. But then they're going to say, okay, if it's deliberate, then why? Well, you just answered it, because this postmodern move is where it's at. They're very unhappy with anything natural. And to be, male and female is something that has a naturalness to it as part of the evolution of the human race. And so you'd wonder at the pathology of a group of people who find that unnatural. But they do. This is the crazy thing you got to get your mind around. The happiness that's involved in falling in love, in being male, being female, then growing up and falling in love, having children, all of this kind of thing. These people aren't particularly fans of any of that stuff. I mean, they may look like humans when they're walking around and you can see them on TV, these Prince Charleses and Queens and all. These people are psychopaths of a most extraordinary degree, and they don't really, and I know this is difficult, but, I read it in the works of my mentors. I had to get my mind around that as well. And they're not particularly great lovers of this planet. So you're talking, I went into this question that you asked in the Atlantis book, and I did try in that book to emphasize the kind of hatred, animosity, antipathy that these people have to everything that is human. It sounds bizarre, but there you are. And so one of the things that makes us human is this masculinity and femininity, isn't it? And the polarity, the positive polarity of that, and how we learn from each other, how we integrate aspects of each other, and so on. And so there's something alien in the blood of these people, and actually there is literally something alien in the blood, that kind of resents that. That's an intriguing line that we don't have time to explore, but there is certainly, more concretely, a post-human agenda in which they're trying to create some sort of new human, human 2.0, in which we could be moving towards a cyborg type of creature. Certainly a kind of organic computer type of being, in which these hard differences and the family unit and all of this stuff is subject to be phased out. It's extremely alarming, But you were talking about some of the celebrities, the celebs, there being these malignant creatures, very, very neurotic and sick people who are chosen, I believe. They don't come from families in the sense, the way we would think of it. These are insiders, the children of insiders, who are then thrown up, and believe me, it's not new. It's been going on since the advent of media, from the advent of television. These are just the latest, more grotesque, as you said, satanic manifestation of it. But you see, I work backwards from that. My interest in these secret societies, one of it was studying this stuff. I used to study way back in the 80s, the Duran Duran videos and all sorts of other weird satanic stuff that they used to produce. And it was sort of going backwards from that led me into more deeper areas. And so there's a great need. One of the reasons why these people are put in front of us is so that girls particularly start identifying with this malignant femininity, the vamp, the la belle dansant mercé, or on a very just on the most basic level, the idea that my body and my smile is going to get me everything I want. This kind of garbage, right? And how to manipulate the opposite sex and what have you. So this is put up there as if these people are the new creators, the new models. It's really pretty garish and astounding. But I totally believe that these people, these actresses and these celebrities are actually members of satanic families who are bloodline, as we call them. They're bloodline in the sense that they belong to these secret societies for many, many years, or they're recruited by them, paid and recruited by them. I also believe mind control is hugely involved in this. Although we have to be very clear what we're talking about when we say mind control. A lot of us have this very thin version of what that, thin understanding of what that means. The Dionysian cult and the cult of Venus are very expert. They're part of, why I call them a Dionysian cult is literally because they're part of an old drug cult. They're part of an old pharmacological hallucinogenic cult. Hallucinogenics, drugs that you can't believe exist. It makes ayahuasca look like, a tea party. Nothing. They've got stuff that would blow your mind, and they often whistle-blow the fact that they've got these substances, okay? So it's not going to be a third world war dropping bombs on us. It's going to be a Frank Herbert Dune situation. In that book you have the spice. The spice changed everything we know about civilization, right? In Frank Herbert's work. Well, it's going to be along that hallucinogenic cult of, you know, like the sort of Timothy Leary type adventure. Again, as I say, it's up to the individual. I'm not talking about whether individuals should be into these subjects or not. I'm just saying that the Illuminati, the top boys, have been involved with these Eleusinian cults, which use a lot of these drugs, and have been using them for thousands of years. That there's a reason why I use the term, you know, Dionysian cult for these people. But part of that, part of the drug cult, part of this cult is also images, moving images. You know, the dancing females, the dancing divas, all sorts of weird stuff. We went into Architects of Control about how one of the manifestations of it amongst during the time of the Crusades was that the Islamic, you know, the assassins, again, the word coming from hashish. See, so just as you have in the East, that tie-in between a warrior cult, a class, a secret society, but a drug cult, in exactly the same way, you have that in other areas of the world. In fact, the Templars picked up on it, brought it with them to the West after seeing it and witnessing it in the East. And many Templars actually married into the families of these Islamic groups and became fully initiated. And in the Islamic tradition, this is the secret tradition of Islam, don't forget, the warrior could do these unbelievable feats in war because he literally had been hypnotized in believing that after death he'd go to a paradisical mountainous paradise in which he'd be served by endless amount of these you know, courtesans and what have you, and he literally had been mind controlled into believing that after death that's where you're going to go. So he was only too happy to die and get there. Well, there's something of the same programming is going on in Hollywood, right? This infantile regressed, we're being regressed, and girls are specifically targeted in order to regress you so that you're actually, you know, being regressed back to an infantile mental state, an emotional state, but not as we again would think of it as psychologists have presented it to us. We're not just being regressed in this life, we're being regressed so that some very incredible limbic and some very incredible archetypal realities come to bear. And it's an incredible study. That's why you see in these rock videos the symbolism in the background in the negative space. And we'll be touching on this more in my future work, but it's really something to bear in mind. You know, I've talked about it in the subversive symbolism, but that was almost a primer to where we need to go. We've, as I say, continue the study and look at it and find out how women and their femininity is being further warped by the purveyance of this stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot. Good questions.
All right, Michael, so we have two more questions from the audience, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So next question here.
Hi, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here and listen to you.
Thanks.
My name is Marisha. I just currently started a radio show of my own. I'm actually Justin's sister, called Sorry for Dream on Blog Talk. And my platform is basically marrying the spirituality with science. And I've been listening to you speak about the, I guess, spiritual warfare going on in the physical plane, unveiling. Is my take on it. And I just wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the Lilith mythology, and do you think that they're connected to the sexual rituals taking place today with respect to the satanic ancient cults and the deterioration of the female femininity, like, I guess, aspect or degrading its moralities? Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. I am familiar with it, and it's going to be, if not the most central motif of the coming program, it's going to, if it's not going to be the central one, it's going to be very central. I did in the Atlantis book touch on it. So in short, to answer your question, basically, in the Atlantis book, I had a particular take on the biblical, you know, the Old Testament Garden of Eden story. There's many ways you can come at that story. There's the hardcore feminist way, which I believe has a lot of elements of truth in it, actually, about how there was just a complete wholesale demotion of the female period. And I mean, to the point where it's preposterous, right? Adam is giving birth to a woman, okay, right, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? So there's a lot of truth to that, right? That this thing was just re-scripted egregiously. Once you start looking into the Hebrew version, you start finding this word re turning up a lot, like it's a recreation and a remaking. It's not just a creation, you know, or one catastrophe or one birth of a man, Adam. There's indications that it's been done before, which alludes you to, you know, which then coaxes you to ask, well, then what kind of civilization did we have before? And the only hint is this character Lilith, isn't it? Because she appears to be antique, before both Adam and Eve. And if you scrape away all that demonic stuff that they put on her, this is just, again, the infantile, you know, this is what the priests teach to the local yokels. So that's why you find out that in Islam and in early Christianity, Lilith is always portrayed as some sort of demoness, right? But that's just a lot of church lip that came later. Once you strip all of that off, and you find out that, again, here we have Lilith, meaning doorway to darkness, or the doorway, the portal, you know, she is one of the last characters that they included in the new story. They could have purged her completely, but by not purging Lilith, it became obvious that there is a sort of a proto-female behind the Eve. Eve is more familiar, Eve is more solar, Eve is more familiar, more yielding, whereas this Lilith is a different kind of female altogether. And I went into this in the Path of the Fool when we touched on the High Priestess card, but time was short, so, you know, again, this is something that can be talked about for hours. But then you start finding that there are prototypes in the Sumerian, in the Babylonian, and even in the Irish, all of these characters. See, the Lilith character is not new to anyone who knows Irish goddess mythology. Right? She's like the Morrigu, you know, a character that later turns up in Arthurian legend as the Morgan Le Fay.
Oh, really? I did not know that. Because my understanding was that she was the first female created from Adam's rib, apparently, and there was a power struggle sexually with her and Adam, and she wanted power over Adam, and therefore God cast her out and then created Eve, the most submissive female. Is that how it goes? Just so our listener, I don't know if anybody else in the audience is familiar with the background there.
Yes.
But
yeah.
I think also that ties into, I believe, what's called the two-soul theory. I don't know if you're familiar with that spirituality, but where in the beginning, in the non-physical form, there's a two soul, like female and male energy, and when we're in the physical plane, we're completely searching for that other half of ourselves, that unified female-male equality part of ourselves, which also is known as the soulmate theory. And I'm thinking, listening to your wonderful information on a lot of these topics today, if you break it down into the physical situation, it kind of also, in my mind, brings like that sort of, that wanting to disconnect it. And so I guess my question regarding that would be, why do you think there is a power struggle for domination between female and male, going back ancient culture to present, with respect to the elitist and you know, we'll say the dark roots above the pyramid scheme?
Yeah, that's a good question, very, very deep. But it's impossible to answer in such a short time, because you're now talking about the origins of the struggle. Because remember, the sword-wielding, okay, let's just talk, imagine we were just speaking purely from a mainstream point of view, right? Imagine right now we're not alternative, we're just talking from a mainstream point of view. You have to ask the question, why is it all over the world that the sword-wielding, solar, patriarchal Indo-Europeans, again, as we say, let's speak strictly from an anthropological point, why did those masculine groups get it into their heads one day to get on their horsebacks and just go and slaughter wholesale entire cults, peoples, tribes? You know, there's got to be a reason. And remember, you would easily have an answer if it just only happened in one corner of Asia, one corner of Europe. You go, oh well, yeah, you know, the weather caused it. Or no, wait a minute, these guys have been feuding for years. You know, like in a Native American context, where you go, oh, the guys at the other side of the hill, you know, these Indian groups that have had age-old conflicts. So one day they just went and slaughtered themselves. You can kind of answer it. But over the whole world, over the whole world. What we're talking about here was all over the world, from all through Asia, all through Far East, into Europe, even parts of Africa. The same kind of paradigm happened, so that the remnants of the matriarchy can barely be discovered. Well, they're going to somewhere like Crete and digging a tiny little island. That's all you got. And a handful of scholars, Maria Gimbutas and 2 or 3 others. I mean, what is this? This is unbelievable. You mean to tell us that for thousands of years leading up to the Neolithic period, there was this other paradigm, and you damn well know that it was, because anyone only had to study the ancient Irish legends to know that the goddess tradition, just like the pyramid itself, couldn't exist just 5 minutes before. It had to have gone back into the dawn, into the dark depths of eternity, because its principles are just too sophisticated to have been invented a few hundred years before the birth of Jesus. So you know that these cultures, existed thousands of years ago, because there's so many sociological, cultural idioms, like music, like basket weaving, like child rearing, and all the rest of it, that simply can't be invented overnight. They have to have antiquity. New evidence showing the settlements on the Saraswati River in India, show that these 10,000 years BC, people were very sophisticated. So the lies that we've been told. And who are those liars? The same patriarchal, authoritarian, patristic institutions, that have their roots in this coming of these, patriarchal civilizations, shall we call them, that then wiped out what was there before. But you're asking, what was the reason? And I am going to be dealing with that, because all struggles have a reason. And that, to me, is the most fascinating part, really, of all of this study that I'm doing right now, is the actual reason. I'm not going to talk about it now because it would take too long, and also it's going to be one of the central parts of the female Illuminati, is the actual reason why this age-old conflict. I'm not just putting you off. It's I have a very good reason for doing this, because I'm still working on it. I'm still myself learning. A lot of stuff that I've been doing in the last lot of years has been turning around in real time, very shortly after I've even learned the thing myself. When I started, it was stuff I was drawing on from 20 years ago. It's no longer like that. A lot of the things I'm doing right now, I'm rediscovering. So we're going to be looking at the same stuff I went into in the Atlantis book, about the Garden of Eden story, about the conflict, about Adam and Eve, and the whole genetic thing, and the symbolism of the tree of life, but this time from a little bit different angle. I've always said in my work that you're meant to walk around this thing, treat it like a gemstone, treat it like a thing of great value. It looks different in different lights. I can't stand these people who go, well, yeah, we got the facts. Got the facts? What are you talking about? The Illuminati's laughing. If the moment that you say that, they're happy. Because they know that you haven't got it together at all. You've only been into the subject about 5 minutes, and that's the whole human race. How could you possibly know how the world structure came into existence, how all of these mega questions exist, and you're just saying, well, no, I just took one look at it and I got it. This thing is so multifaceted. I talk it's like a Rubik's Cube, and of which you can only see 3 sides of any cube. So you've got to do some real study to walk around it, look at it in different lights, different perspectives, and that's what we're going to be doing with this subject, because that Garden of Eden story is fascinating. And I spent my whole life to write the Atlantis book, was what I'd done, since I was a child, since 13 years of age to the day I wrote that. That's one perspective. That was one journey of discovery, but it doesn't stop at the writing of that book. There are other ways to look at this whole concept of Eve and who she was, right? And in the Atlantis book, it was mostly a positive rendering of that archetype. But there are other ways to look at it, and that includes this Lilith character, and how she's represented in myths coming later, and also how she was a prototype, these fascinating goddess characters prior to the Christian era. Really interesting stuff there. And how, what did the church who rescripted this, these churchmen who rescripted it, what did they gain from that? Have they gained anything? Well, I believe, yes, they have. They've gained world control from doing it. Because the amount of suppression that happens psychologically when you repress the feminine makes you just jelly in their hands, putty in their hands, the moment that you're not an integrated being. Because as all martial artists know, and there's one sitting right beside you there, the yin energy is as strong as the masculine. It is not weak. Oh, the lies we've been taught. The lies we've been taught. It's harder to walk downhill than it is uphill. It's harder to keep your eyes perfectly straight and steady, and harder to sit in a yoga pose than it is to be moving around. So martial artists have known from, BC, that the so-called yin energy is not weak. But we in the Western world have been taught a pack of lies about the feminine energy, as I said a few minutes ago, about we've got a skewed understanding. The moment you mention females and feminine, you're thinking in terms of weakness and complicity and compliance and subservience. What a lot of nonsense. And by reading the Irish myths and other things like that, you soon get that knocked on the head. That there was a whole class of warrior queens in ancient days that the modern educational groups don't want you to know about. And there was a whole bunch of rites and rituals. You can use the heading underworld cycle rituals that was involved in the training of the young king hero. It wasn't just 6 overworld cycles in which the solar king went around and cudgeled people over the head and, rode against fellow knights in the classic way. It was this whole other transition, this whole other set of tests that were infinitely more threatening to him, to his ego, that he may not have been able to overcome. And the whole purpose of that was to make him an integrated being so that he realized that he just didn't have a world to go around and conquer, but there was an inner world. And as the moment that the druidic cults were killed and that these female cults were overthrown, the idea of going through that process of the underworld started to be, stripped down. You have elements, but it's a very, very paltry way. In some Masonic sort of rituals, you kind of have it, the whole idea about being born again, from the coffin and all. So they still have the sort of outward trappings of it, right? But they don't have it by any means. The whole thing is completely changed. And that did enormous damage. Like I said, as you said, they will wear the trappings, the priests will wear the robes, they'll still have the baptismal font of the salted water, which represented the womb, and you'll still have all the feminine symbols. You still have a Mother Mary, but what the hell is that? It's all stripped down. It's very banal. And now you've got even a new emphasis in taking the psyche of the female into a new level of debauchery. Okay, so right now there's even a step up. As of late, probably since the new millennium, and these videos, these rock videos, and these creatures that they're throwing up to the young women of today, and the fashions, it's a new step up, I believe, another intensification of the war against the female psyche, and it's damaging. So we have to be able to get this information out to, mothers should be sharing it with their children to, again, build up the immunity that's so needed, so that this doesn't happen. But my interest is in the modern day and what's going on, but always to tie it back to the roots, because none of this tyranny, none of this mind control started 100 years ago or 10 minutes ago. It has its roots going way, way back into some of the darkest aspects of history. And so, the projects continue to try and bring that to the light.
Thank you so much, Mark, for giving us some of your time. I just want to...
I can't hear you.
Oh. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and I'm very pleased to be here. I just want to say that I believe, and I hope that you do too, I'm sure you do, that we're now living in an age where awareness and the veil's being lifted, and I just want to say that I appreciate your work, because there's more people out there that want to learn about this information, and the more of us out there learning, the less sheep there are. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we have one more time. Okay, we've got time. Come on up. Let's do it. One more question here, Michael.
Just a quick one. Michael, I'm just wondering if you can tell us anything about cultures or a period of time when the sun would have been identified as feminine.
Say the last part again, louder.
I'm just wondering about a time or cultures where the sun would have been identified as feminine.
Oh, yeah. You've got to go quite far back, past the Neolithic period. And it's not just the sun. It's a lot of the symbols I was mentioning there come out of goddess worship. And remember I was talking about the Eye of Ra? The Eye of Ra, the cult of Ra, goes back pretty much to the dawn of Egypt. So you're already talking officially 3,000 years, and that's almost considered a joke by alternative theorists who know that Egypt stretched back even further than that. So the cult of Amun-Ra, he was the king of the gods, and yet he's always seen with his two mothers, right? Not always, but a great deal of shots, these pictures is hieroglyphic of the great king, the great god Amun-Ra. You get this, as a matter of fact, even the word Amen that they say at the end of prayers, a lot of people, relate that, say, oh, that's Egyptian, isn't it? And they think of Amun-Ra, but it's actually not a reference to the sun. It's a reference to the moon, because men, M-E-N, represented the mother and it represented the moon. So Ahmen, even A-H, Like at the beginning of the Pharaoh's name, Ahmosis, AH even represented the moon. But there was actually a god called Min, M-I-N. And the word M-E-N also represented the moon. So there again, as I say, it's in plain sight. It doesn't really represent the sun, Amun, in that context. It represents the moon. So vice versa. You have a lot of symbols that were taken from masculine symbols that were actually originally feminine. But they're so, today in our mind, we think of them as being so masculine that we just can't simply unthink that. If I was to tell you that, oh, the obelisk, the standing stone, that's a female symbol, they'd laugh till they drop, because we're conditioned to believe. You know, like I said, the pyramid it wasn't the #1 goddess symbol, but it was definitely a goddess symbol. It was really up there, right? It was one of her main symbols. So you know, that takes a lot of unthinking, doesn't it? But the moment that you start to then do that, then you go, well, wait a minute, I've got to then study, rethink about the entire Moses story, or in fact any. We've got Mount Horeb, we've got Mount Sinai, we've got this so-called Sermon on the Mount, which is almost a classic symbol from the Bible. We've got Golgotha, Jesus being crucified on a hill. We've got Capitol Hill. We've got Camp David. We've got hills galore, like I said, the churches. So then we start to look at things. In Celtic Ireland, they got no problem again understanding that, because the mound was always a symbol of the goddess. So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, when you start to understand that the garden is another one of these symbols. And the sun itself, as I said, the astrological symbol for the sun, which is a circle with a dot in it, pretty much gives it away right there, because it's a female symbol, it's the breast. So the further you go back to the ancient pre-Vedics, the early Gothics, the Nordics, then you start finding these facts. Then it's then that you start finding these solar goddesses. There was a goddess, for instance, in England called Sulis. She's a version of Athena, Pallas Athena. In fact, if you go to my Irish Origins website, click on Appendices, you'll see a link there on Pallas Athena. And one of her other names, right, is Sulis, a word that actually meant the sun. And she was a goddess connected very strongly with Bath, the place in England, Bath. Some of her shrines were, I think the whole city's built right on top of her shrine, just like London is built over the Lud Dunham, right, the castle of Lu. But Lu was the sun god of the Celts, and he's literally found all over the world. One of the greatest studies you could ever imagine to do is the study of the cult of Lu. That's why you have Lourdes in France. That's why you got Louis, the name of the kings, right? Lugal, Logos in the Bible, the very word of God was actually called in Roman Logos, Latin. Well, where does the word Logos come from? Nobody says to say, nobody goes any further. Logos, that's known long before Rome even rose. Rome was as old as about 600, 700 BC. The god Lu, you can't even count. It's pre-Celtic. It goes thousands of years before. And you find him in the Sumeria, you find him all over, and you have his cult. Who are these Levites? You see, so the solar cult symbolism, to answer your question specifically, is that this solar cult symbolism is kind of young. That's what you got to understand, that the solar cult is almost like a tacked-on ending to a vast stellar cult, right? A whole sidereal cult that is so ancient, it's frightening. And that cult then gave rise to these other churches. But just like a castle has battlements, just like a college has houses, these are other little houses of a central college. And that college is stellar. And within that stellar college, you had a female wing, let's say, and you had a male wing. You actually did. And so they had their own takes on it. And they had their own little badges, just like today, colleges, schools, fraternities. That's where it all comes from. All this nonsense about school fraternities, and even in the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides and Masonry and all. Where do you think that all comes from? Where do we get degree ceremonies? It's degrees of the zodiac. And the number 33 and all of these numbers coming out of zodiological worship. And so all the later cults might say on the surface we're solar, or on the surface we're lunar, or we're a fire cult, we're a volcano cult, or we're a Saturnian cult, or we're a Dionysian cult. And it starts getting all, frayed at the end as we move down into, the more historical periods of ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Then it's cults for everything, isn't it? It's just like today. one thing, one political party starts off, and then you have a million tentacles. The Green Party, the Blue Party, and millions of other little parties and little cliques and cults. Well, that's kind of how it happened with this. But anyone who was really a priest within these cults, anyone who had really done their homework, knew that these were just modern hybridized versions of a much more august college, that came out of the West in the most ancient times. And so when you're studying that, archive, not when you're studying all the sort of peripheral stuff, then it gets confusing. But when you start studying the symbolism of the ancient stellar cult and where that takes you, then you start to understand the role that women had, and the fact that absolutely, that these could be not only a warrior class. We hear about the Amazons later on, again, sort of Romanesque. Amazons, why don't they tell you who they were? They were a female wing of what was known as the Scythians, the greatest horsemen, greatest horse riders. In fact, Amazons only took husbands from the Scythian race because they were Scythians. They're just under a different name. And then they finally ended up living in a slightly different area of Europe. But they were Scythians through and through. And they were a warrior class. But they've been represented to us, by duplicitous historians in a skewed manner, so that we don't really get it, how they were connected to the Goths, and to the Scythians and Sarmatians and all these other fascinating peoples. Then you go over to the Tsarion Basin, they're digging them up. White mummies, Caucasian mummies. Oh dear, what are we going to do now? Can't hide it. Right, but these are horseback riding women. Shit, what do we do with it? Well, you cover it up, as you've done for years. You burn the books, you burn the libraries, you kill the people, you put them on the stake, you silence them, and you assassinate them professionally, or if they keep on going, then you assassinate them physically. And that's what's been done to the mentors that I work, my work is based on, that I've studied, there hasn't been one that wasn't professionally assassinated, and in some cases even physically taken out. Look at the fate of people like Barry Fell, Conor McDowry, Anna Wilkes, Ignatius Donnelly, and Clements Beaumont. There's not one of them, and there's Eastern versions of these thinkers as well. Not one of those people that was able to get up and be accepted. And yet today, in this duplicitous History Channel bullshit world, now they're re-scripting those people's discoveries as if it's all brand new. We just popped the cracker today. That is desecration. That is the desecration of those people's tombs. You do not do that. These people lived in poverty. They lost their friends. Their books were, suppressed. These L.A. Waddells, these Velikovskys, someone died in misery, unheard, unknown geniuses of towering level. And so to re-script their stuff today, repackage it, and say, well, we just kind of discovered this, is absolute nonsense. So part of my work is to try and make sure that these mentors, it's like a Goodwill Hunting type of thing. Turn to page 37, pal. That's where you got it, all right? That's what needs to be done, because there's nothing new under the sun. And all of these discoveries, E.A. Wallace Budge, and so many other names I could mention, it has come out of great scholars of the past, and now it's just been repackaged for a modern audience as if we've only come across these things today. Like catastrophism, like, all the sorts of things that we get into in my forum. You can find reams and reams of it on the Atlantis page of how they do this, how clever they are, as the news are. Welcome, today archaeologists, found something, dug up part of Jerusalem and found an old Celtic shrine there. We don't know how it got there, stuff like this. We just, and like I said, these Tsarion Basin discoveries and what have you, it's endless. We found Viking ships over in Boston, can't tell you how it got there, Yeah, well, Barry Fell was able to tell you. How come you didn't listen to him when he was alive? Oh, it's unbelievable. They're pulling out Irish torques. And I can go on for hours. I won't bore you to death with this, but they found Irish knotwork. They found Irish torques in Tutankhamun's tomb. They found something like 70 or more beautifully crafted golden torques that you only find in Ireland. Those Tsarion Basin mummies, the braiding of the women's hair is only found in Denmark. These things are absolutely idiosyncratic. Right? The costumes, the colors, the weave, and the hair braiding is only found in ancient Denmark. Well, we've been told that there was no such collusion between any of these people, right? Remember that whole thing about the cocaine mummies? How could cocaine turn up in the corpses and the tombs of Egyptian mummies that was only discovered in South America? And then they find pictures of elephants in South America that, they tell us that they couldn't, how can elephants be pictorialized over? The lies we've been told. And you know, and you've had people of the past, your Arthur C. Clarke's and others who've tried to uncover it, but that process needs to go on. You just don't stop and leave it there because these people know how to roll over, right? They just suppress all that film footage. Those guys are dead and forgotten. And so we have a new generation who's simpleton. And then, so you have to have other people who are going to come back and make sure that the new generation knows this. That's why I've got 14 websites. That's why I've written these books. It's because we're up in a war here. And these people wait. They stand up, they watch from the hill. They're very clever. They're very good generals. And they watch the generational change and go, new bunch of ignoramuses born. Let's suppress all the previous books. Let's make sure you can't get those books by L.A. Waddell and Commons Boma and take off all those wonderful programs that used to exist. We're not going to show those anymore. And so the new generation is vulnerable. So the work of people like myself is to make sure that never happens, and we do what we can through YouTube and through videos and through conferences like this to make sure that the new generation especially is reminded of these giants upon whose shoulders we stand. Let that never be forgotten.
Well, Michael, I think that as sad as we are to not be able to have been able to contact Geo Griffin today, I think that there's some synchronicity here. Everybody just got to take part in an MSAR conspiratorial event here, and we were able to spend some more time on this issue and really break it down for people. I just personally want to thank you so much for your time, for your work and your dedication. I consider you one of my mentors and very much like a sensei. And for those that have maybe heard that term in martial arts, there's a breakdown to that term. It means one who has gone before, one who basically has done all the hard work. And it also has three meanings where it means teacher, scholar, and warrior. And I take that very seriously, and I consider everybody we're going to be having on stage throughout this tour, whether they're Skyping in or whether they're here physically, to be warriors, to be senseis of a modern time, and to be able to disseminate wisdom and knowledge that has been suppressed, that desperately needs to be known. So Michael, thank you so much, and I greatly appreciate you being part of Modern Knowledge Tour.
Yeah, well,